I thought she was pulling my leg.
Yeah.
And when the president confirmed, I said, Taibo, how did we get here? I said, I'm a social scientist. And
did you manage to sleep on that night, though?
No, I really was not
pondering
sure.
the whole time.
What is this now? How did I get here? So it was quite strange. For some time, I just kept on saying to myself, how did I get here? And what am I expected to do here? All the people, I've known the president for a long time, even during, he knows who I am. So how did I get here? But it took me time really to...
Welcome back. Today, we are asking a very serious question that many South Africans are starting to worry about. Is Angie Motsheka's army really ready to defend President Cyril Ramaphosa? This is a question we have to ask because since Minister Motsheka took over the defense portfolio in July 2024, it seems like Ramaphosa has been doing everything in his power to poke the giant. He has been provoking Donald Trump repeatedly, and this has all happened in less than 12 months. We are seeing a pattern here. First, it was the stance on Palestine and the case at the International Court of Justice. Then, it was the way the government has handled the issue of Afrikaners and the claims of farm attacks, which Trump has taken very personally. Then we had the drama at the G20 where South Africa was hosting, and now, the biggest one of all, the situation in Venezuela. It feels like Ramaphosa is dragging the tail of a lion, and we have to wonder if our military, under Motsheka, is actually prepared for the consequences if Trump decides to strike back. Before I go any further, I want you to watch this short clip of the South African representative at the UN Council from a few years back.
Mr. President, we want to thank you for convening today's sessions on the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, of its national laws governing such elections. These elections also take place in accordance with the agreement of electoral guarantees that was signed by political parties shortly before the elections. The elections were further overseen by Venezuelan National Electoral Council, like in any other countries, developed and developing countries. It was on this basis that the South African President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, congratulated President Maduro following his inauguration for the second term as President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Mr. President, a founding principle of the South African constitutional democracy that we hold very dear is the respect for the rule of law. We are therefore deeply concerned by what is a clear attempt in Venezuela to circumvent the country's constitutional legal mechanisms which govern its elections. Any grievances or dispute should be resolved in a peaceful manner through a proper mechanism and processes provided for in the Constitution of Venezuela.
Right, this is where our analysis begins. Now please click like and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you this brutal analysis. Did you hear what that representative said in the video? They were thanking the president for the session on Venezuela and claiming that the elections there were done according to national laws and electoral guarantees. They even said that President Ramaphosa congratulated Nicolas Maduro on his inauguration for a second term. But let's be honest here. While South Africa was busy celebrating Maduro, the rest of the world was looking at evidence of massive rigging, human rights abuses, and a stolen election. South Africa claims to hold the respect for the rule of law very dear. Yet they are defending a regime that many say has completely ignored the law to stay in power. By congratulating Maduro when the US and others were calling him a dictator, Ramaphosa was already setting the stage for a fight with Donald Trump. Now let's fast forward to the present day. I'm going to read to you from recent articles about what's been happening with South Africa, Venezuela, and the United States. And I'm going to go through these articles paragraph by paragraph, because every single detail matters. Let me start with the article from the South African newspaper. The headline reads, South African ambassador to Venezuela wanted SANDF to fight the United States. Just let that headline sink in for a moment. A South African diplomat wanted our defense force to fight against the United States military. The subtitle says, Joseph Nkosi could have landed South Africa in deep trouble. Now, let me read you the opening section of this article. Why did Joseph Nkosi, the South African ambassador to Venezuela, threaten the United States with military action? It's the perfect example of think before you speak. In a bizarre show of pseudo-bravado and nationalist companionship, Nkosi offered up the services of the South African National Defense Force, SANDF, to help an embattled Venezuelan government. Stop right there. An ambassador, representing South Africa on foreign soil, offered up the SANDF without any authorization. He didn't consult with the president. He didn't consult with the Minister of Defense. He didn't consult with the Department of International Relations. He just decided on his own that South Africa should offer military support to Venezuela. This is absolutely insane. Let me continue reading. The Venezuelan government has been having a torrid time quelling public dissent, resulting from a dire financial crisis. The country is experiencing a currency meltdown, compacted by nationwide protests, water shortages, and a collapse of its healthcare sector. Irresponsible is an understatement. This is potentially catastrophic. But here comes the really explosive part. Let me read the next section. Venezuelan publisher El Carabobeño reported on Nkosi's bizarre and reckless statements made during a diplomatic event to honor former President Nelson Mandela. Nkosi cited economic blockades as a justifiable reason for military retaliation against the US, saying, now listen very carefully to Nkosi's exact words. We have always fought against this blockade. We are going to support them. We are not going to let them die alone. If it is necessary that we bring our soldiers to fight against the Americans, we will do it. We cannot allow ourselves to be dominated by the American administration. Let me read that critical sentence again. If it is necessary that we bring our soldiers to fight against the Americans, we will do it. A South African ambassador said that we would bring our soldiers to fight against Americans. At an event honoring Nelson Mandela, a man who preached peace and reconciliation, this diplomat was threatening war with the United States. He said we cannot allow ourselves to be dominated by the American administration. This is the language of confrontation. This is the language of declaring yourself an adversary of the United States. But Nkosi didn't stop there. Let me continue reading from the article. The overeager ambassador didn't stop there, although he should have. Nkosi went on to threaten US dominance, saying, and here's another direct quote that needs to be highlighted. The article mentions at the top, the days of the US dominating the world are numbered. So Nkosi is not just offering military support to Venezuela. He's making grand geopolitical statements about the end of American global dominance. He's positioning South Africa as part of a coalition that will challenge and ultimately end American power. This is extraordinary rhetoric coming from a diplomat representing a country that desperately needs American trade, investment, and cooperation. Now let me read the next crucial section. Let's be honest here. US President Donald Trump probably didn't bat an eyelid at Nkosi's threats. It's doubtful the US president even took his utterances seriously, if indeed he is even aware of them. Trump definitely did not tremble at the prospect of encountering the South African National Defense Force on the battlefield. This is the reality check. Trump probably didn't even hear about Nkosi's threats, and even if he did, he wouldn't take them seriously, because everyone knows that the SANDF is not a threat to the United States military. The idea is almost laughable from a military standpoint. One American aircraft carrier has more combat power than our entire military. But just because Trump might not have taken the threat seriously, doesn't mean there are no consequences for making such statements. But But now we need to look at what's happening currently.
Well, meanwhile, the South African government has called on the UN Security Council to convene urgently to address the situation in Venezuela. In fact, the statement before me by Durko saying that South Africa views these actions as a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations, which mandates that all member states refrain from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state.
The government of South Africa notes with grave concern the recent developments which were confirmed by the United States, that the United States has conducted a large-scale military strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been captured along with his wife and flown out of the country. South Africa views these actions as a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations, which mandates that all member states refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any sovereign state. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepening a crisis. Unlawful unilateral force of this nature undermines the stability of the international law system and the principle of equality among states. South Africa calls on the United Nations Security Council, the body mandated to maintain international peace and security, to urgently convene to address the situation.
South Africa is calling for an urgent UN Security Council meeting about Venezuela, and South Africa is accusing the United States of violating the UN Charter. This is not historical. This is happening now. Let me continue. First, we have the historical record from a few years ago showing that South Africa defended Maduro's elections at the UN and that a South African ambassador threatened to send troops to fight against the United States. Second, we have the current statement showing that South Africa is condemning the US military strike against Venezuela and calling for UN intervention. What does this tell us? It tells us that South Africa's support for Venezuela and opposition to US policy is not new. It's not a one-time mistake. It's a consistent pattern of foreign policy that has been in place for years. It tells us that there are people within South African foreign policy circles who are willing to take extreme positions against the United States. And it tells us that Ramaphosa's government right now is choosing to condemn American military action and to defend a regime that has destroyed its own country. Think about what South Africa is doing here. The United States just removed one of the most destructive dictators in the Western Hemisphere. Maduro turned Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserves, into a country where people are starving. Millions of Venezuelans have fled as refugees. The economy has collapsed. Basic services have broken down. Political opponents have been imprisoned. The media has been silenced. And South Africa's response to the United States removing this dictator is to condemn the US and call for UN action against America. Why would South Africa do this? What possible benefit does South Africa get from defending Maduro and condemning the United States? Let's think about the costs first. In August 2025, Trump imposed a 30% tariff on South African goods. 30%. Do you understand what this means? South African exports to the United States suddenly became 30% more expensive. Our automotive industry has been devastated. Our agricultural sector is reeling. Companies that relied on the American market are laying off workers. And why did Trump do this? Because trade negotiations stalled. But why did trade negotiations stall? Because the South African government was taking anti-American positions on multiple issues, and Trump decided he was done negotiating with a country that treats America as an enemy. But the tariffs are just the beginning. Trump has also cut $440 million in US foreign aid to South Africa. $440 million. Gone. Programs that helped South Africans with HIV and AIDS through PEPFAR. Cut. Business development programs. Cut. All of this has been eliminated by executive order, and this is not money that goes to the government. This is money that helps ordinary South Africans people living with HIV, small business owners trying to grow their companies. Trump took this away from South African people because Ramaphosa chose to defend dictators like Maduro. And there's more. The United States boycotted the G20 summit that South Africa hosted last month. The world's largest economy refused to attend a major international summit hosted by South Africa. This is a diplomatic humiliation of the highest order. It signals to the entire world that the United States does not take South Africa seriously and does not consider us a reliable partner. And Trump has officially stated that South Africa will not be invited to the 2026 G20 summit in Miami. We're being excluded from one of the most important international economic forums in the world, but the biggest threat is still unfolding. AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, expired in September 2025. This is the trade agreement that gave South African products preferential access to American markets. Thousands of South African jobs depend on AGOA. Entire industries were built on the foundation of AGOA preferences. Congress is debating a one-year extension, but here's what you need to know. US Trade Representative Jameson Greer has specifically called South Africa a unique problem. Those are his exact words, a unique problem. And he has signaled that the Trump administration intends to exclude South Africa from any future trade benefits. And for what benefit? What does South Africa gain? We gain nothing. Venezuela has no money. Venezuela has no trade to offer. Venezuela cannot invest in South Africa. Venezuela cannot provide security guarantees. Defending Venezuela provides zero material benefits to South Africa. The only possible explanation is ideological. The ANC has historical ties to socialist movements. There's an anti-American, anti-Western sentiment among some elements of the ANC and the South African left. There's a belief that South Africa should align with the so-called global South against Western dominance. And there's perhaps a calculation that the world order is changing and that American power is declining.